Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. How exciting to have everybody here. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm V, or Vienna. I am a space medicine researcher and I'm very glad to be invited to moderate this webinar tonight. This webinar has been brought to you by Sonic Horizons and eSpaces. And today we're talking about an update on the Moon Village Association first payload project. Before we begin, I'd like to pay respects to our First Nations people, past, present, and future. So if I could please hand over to our first speaker.
Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. I'm Liza Koumi. I am the project manager for the first payload project of the MVA, and I'm going to give you a short summary of the project and some of the successes we've had in the 1 year we've been working on it. Can we start the slides? Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm assuming most people here know about the MVA, but just in case, I'm going to give a short summary of what the MVA is and what the payload project is. So why are we here, basically? So the MVA is an NGO, the purpose of which is to be a global forum for all the people and all the companies that want to be involved in the lunar economy. Despite the name Moon Village, the purpose of this association is not to build a moon base, right? So we're not actually building something through the MVA. The purpose of the MVA is for its members to have a place to communicate in order for them to build a moon base if that's what they choose to do, or to pursue whatever other business goal they have or educational goal in the context of the lunar economy. The project itself was started in order to go from the theoretical, let's talk about how we do it, to the practical, let's actually do it, right? Let's put the project together that will do something on the moon. The purpose of the project is to get a camera on the moon and to live stream the Earth in order to recreate the overview effect, a very interesting psychological phenomenon that astronauts have reported feeling. It has to do with the Earth hanging in the void with no border zones like you usually get on a map, and seeing that we're basically all one united planet. So obviously, if that's a nice symbolic thing to do, right? It's an international organization where people need to work together. Therefore, the overview effect has a nice symbolic element to it. But we also want to be useful, so any data we generate, we want to share with the science community to advance research. But the most important part for this webinar specifically is the third point there, which is that this is a pilot project. We want to actually start doing stuff to encounter all the challenges and obstacles, to overcome them in order for the next projects that start to have a pathway to progress. And just to summarize, what we want to do is we want our members to combine forces, their strengths, to put together this mission. Next slide, please. What does combining forces actually mean? How does it look like in practice, right? This will happen through in-kind contributions that we are trying to set up. Usually when somebody wants a mission, right, an Earth observation mission, for example, whatever, you have a client that hires a prime contractor, that hires subcontractors. Subcontractors sell hardware, services, and so on. These are put together by the prime contractor, so it's a sales-based approach. What we are trying to do is to find strengths that combine well within our members. For example, if company A has a camera and they have a business plan to use that camera on the moon and make money from the data they generate, but the cost of launching this camera to the moon is too much for them, and company B has a lander which by default needs cameras for their operations and so on, and that has a cost, we can combine the two together The camera is given for free to the lander. The lander carries it to the moon, which it would do anyhow. It uses it for its operation for safe landing or whatever else, and at some point transfers the use of this camera to the camera manufacturer so that they can also pursue their own goals. So we have removed, in this theoretical example, we have removed the cost of launch for one of our members, and we have reduced the cost of hardware for the other member. Other examples could be a student wants to build their CV up with working on a real mission. They do some work for the MVA on a volunteer basis and so on. There are many possible collaborations like this. Next slide, please. Okay, so obviously there are some challenges here. This is kind of a non-traditional approach to things. It's not that the MVA has invented the sharing economy, of course. This is a concept that exists, but we have seen that a lot of the companies and people that approach us, they are doing so as a sales pitch. They are trying to sell something. That's a few of the companies that approached us at the beginning, they had understood the concept of in-kind contributions, but this wasn't always the case. But more relevant to this webinar, the most important challenge we are facing is this. If you have a camera and the other company has a lander and you can put them together and go to the moon, why do you need the MVA? Why the middleman, right? So what is, in startup speak, right? What is the value proposition of the MVA? Next slide, please. So you will see that in this webinar, I'm not going to mention anything technical about the project. I am focusing, also due to the limited time, to this concept of collaboration. For us that have worked with the MVA quite a while, we know the strengths of the MVA. It's an international organization, which means it has the ability to give you international reach for your company, for yourself. It can set up events, it can set up the yearly workshop that's happening. So there is this networking, this access, and that's we know about it, but it is sometimes difficult to quantify. So what does that mean, gaining access to a worldwide network? How do you do it? What is the action you need to take to trigger this connection? As a result of this need to quantify the situation a bit better, we have started creating a document which we call the outreach mapping. What this is going to be in the end is a menu of all the abilities that can be used within the MVA. So how do you network? If you want to set up a webinar, how do you go about it? How can you get exposure if you're a university and you want to attract international students, all that stuff. So this is a document that is being worked on at the moment and it will be made public at some point. It is not ready yet, but it is progressing quite well. Something important that came up in the last couple of weeks, we have been trying to push for the rest of the MVA, the other subgroups, to contribute to this document. And we managed to set up a meeting with a lot of stakeholders that progressed this document. And the really nice thing that came out of it is that although we thought we were pushing for this, all the other groups were pushing from this, from their side as well. So we got together and we saw that there is a lot of work being done. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite slide in this presentation. In the 1 year that this project has been operating, we've had a few successes, and I have selected these three to mention very briefly because they exemplify what we are trying to achieve, this whole collaboration thing, right? So for the first thing there that you see, Office of Other Spaces is an architectural office in Melbourne. They use space data, Earth observation data, for landscaping. This is a very interesting concept, and with their help, we set up a mini event in February, back in the time where we could still meet other people in person, basically. And that we use this event to present the concept of the project to the people locally there in Melbourne and to interact with people that are not necessarily in the space domain, to see how people could see their potential involvement as individuals to the MVA activities. This was very interesting, and it also allowed us to interact with school children, which are the next generation of people that would be relevant to the lunar economy, right? And so we got to do a little bit of educational outreach as well. And we got featured in a podcast, Space Junk. If if you want to look it up, there's a couple of episodes there that feature clips from the event. A nice result of this discussion as well and this event was that together with the Office of Other Spaces, we started looking at how we could do more practical stuff for our members. For example, those of you maybe that haven't heard, Australia is investing a lot of money now in its industry in order to get the Australian industry, the Australian companies part of the international supply chain. We started discussing with our Australian partners how the MVA could assist them in order with this networking and those abilities to become part of the international space chain and possibly even get some funding for their company. This is at the moment a discussion that is in progress. It is at the early stages, but it has given some interesting views of how the MVA strengths could be used. On to the next one. Space Impulse is a platform. It's a social network for previous slide, please. So the next collaboration is, sorry, can you go back one slide? Okay, anyhow, I'll continue. So Space Impulse is a social network, but it is geared towards space individuals, right? Space people, either professionals or amateurs in the field. It offers connection between the people, but it also offers some of the things that are needs of the MVA. One of the things that we want to do with our networking in the MVA is we want to bring people together so that they can apply for jobs through a job portal, they can offer their services to other members and so on. And this functionality did not exist within the MVA website, but Space Impulse already had the platform set up. So instead of us reinventing the wheel, we decided to make the collaboration happen so that we can get services for our members, and the Space Impulse company could also get some extra exposure for their startup. This is a very interesting collaboration. It is happening, it's progressing as we're speaking. And if you want, please go and join Space Impulse so that you can see it as it is happening. It is free to join. And if you're an MVA member, you might also get some extra perks in the coming future. Last company in this list, a very recent development and one of my favorite things that came out of this project, Sonic Horizons. If you were wondering why the VR environment, this is the answer. So Sonic Horizons is a company that came from one of our team members networking through the MVA and outside on behalf of the project and spotting an opportunity, a business opportunity for herself. She found this nice VR platform, this company with a nice VR platform, for which I will not say much because we have our next speaker for that. And she noticed that there is a need for like remote educational tools for children. So she combined the two, she created a company, she has already run a sort of focus group on educational topics with children, and this is progressing quite well, and it is just a development of the last month. She's also looking, of course, how to apply this to other space companies, but it's not exclusive to space. So that's what the MVA can do through its networking. Next slide, please. Okay, so plan for the future. As I mentioned, this outreach mapping will allow members to see what is possible within the MVA and give a guideline of how you can use those capabilities. Once we have it and we publish it and people can start interacting with it, we would like to select some of those capabilities and actually test run them. So we want to find partners with whom we can select a topic and do it in a way that is quantifiable for both sides, right? So I want the partner to be able to express specifically what they are getting as a benefit from the MVA, and also we want an understanding of what we are getting as a benefit from this partnership. And you're seeing a plug there for the next two documents that are coming up, for which I don't have time to speak. But basically, in summary, what they are going to do is once we test these interactions and we find in-kind contributions that are win-win for both sides, we're going to come up with all those sets of in-kind contributions that link lead to the end result of come around the moon. And that will be the mission. Next slide, please. Quickly, because I'm also running out of time, I will say just this last thing. If you take anything from the presentation by me today, it's this line, that the success of the MVA is that people join it, they come in with ideas and business ideas, whatever other ideas, and through the MVA, they get the opportunity to interact with others, build teams, and create projects. So if you want to get involved, join the MVA, connect on our social media so you can follow our progress. And also don't forget there is a workshop coming up in early November, which this year is free of charge because there is no venue to rent and so on. So it's a good opportunity. You won't have to travel. You will get to see the teams from the inside. So also keep an eye out for the project. We are going to launch a website soon. And also we might be advertising in the next few months new roles in the project because we need to add some more people. And these will be advertised on the MVA website and on Space Impulse to take advantage of the new cooperation. So that's me. Sorry for overrunning a little bit. I'm looking forward to your question.
Thank you, Liza. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed learning about everything that MVA does, and it's really quite a lot. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Philippe van Nendeveld. Philippe is an award-winning VR creator and an advocate for spaceflight, as well as a futurist. I'd love to know what a futurist is, so yeah, please share that with us too, Philippe. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. The floor is yours.
Okay.
Sound is on.
Thank you for that introduction, V. To answer your question, a futurist is somebody who studies the future and who makes predictions about it using current trends. It's also somebody who is working in emerging technologies and helps to bring the future into the present by developing and applying such technologies. I would also like to thank the Moon Village Association for inviting me to give my presentation from the Tranquility Base on the surface of the virtual moon, which we produced for the benefit of this particular event. I am Philippe van Nedervelde. I will be celebrating my 30 years as a professional in the VR industry in a few months. And to my knowledge, I am also the founder of the world's oldest continuously operated virtual reality studio called eSpaces. We have won multiple awards in the field of VR, and I have also been a lifelong space buff. This is me on the arm of my late father, who told me that he made sure that I watched Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon live as it happened in 1969. After that, when I was 12, I created my first organization, which was called the Belgian Space Information Center. And over the course of 6 years before I went to university, I put together one of the richest space documentation centers of the Low Countries where I was born. My talk today is about cyberspace meeting outer space. My first exposure to virtual reality was when Scientific American published on its cover an image of the VPL Data Glove, one of the earliest virtual reality gloves, on October 1987. I was hooked immediately, and I was thrilled to find out that the DNA of virtual reality as we know it today is very intimately intertwined with the space industry, in particular with NASA. Because as you see here from a picture back in the 80s, it is NASA who worked with contractors to develop something that is already recognizable as the virtual reality headset that you can buy in stores today. So they contracted with a company called VPL and others, and they used virtual reality to train EVAs for shuttle missions and on the space station. Virtual reality today is even used on the International Space Station for some experiments. Here you see a shot of astronauts on the ground practicing EVA with very high-end virtual reality here. So the usage of virtual reality for the space industry, the use cases are really myriad. Some of them are the training of mission team members, the training of astronaut EVAs, extravehicular activities, the simulation of missions for mission planning, but also digital twins to solve urgent issues such as on the International Space Station. Also, virtual reality can and will be used for live tracking of mission progress. A little bit more about that in a moment. It can also and is already used for outreach, PR, public education. For example, for the first demonstration mission of its Crew Dragon, SpaceX offered on its website a small simulation where you could try your own hand in flat screen VR at docking the Crew Dragon to the International Space Station. And it will also be used for the virtual colonization, homesteading, and settling of space before we actually do that as humanity in real outer space. I would like to next tell you about projects that we ourselves at eSpaces are doing and that are focused on the space industry. For this, I would like to point out that while we are agnostic in terms of hardware, software, etc. for VR, we pretty much can work in any of the platforms out there and have, but we favor an approach to virtual reality, especially for the space industry, that we call univirtual. What do I mean by that? Well, there is an open standards platform technology out there called WebXR. The XR is an umbrella term for virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. It's backed by the majors such as Mozilla, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Samsung, Google, etc. So the way it works is all you need is a URL that you punch in and then you go to the link, and then you can access the same virtual environment in single user or multi-user mode on any device, on any browser, anywhere on the planet at any time. It just works. For the end user, it is extremely simple. There is no viewer, no plugin, no installation process, no updating, nothing. It just works. And it works on smartphones and tablets and laptops and desktops in so-called flat screen mode, and immersively on virtual reality headsets and augmented reality headsets. What you are seeing right now is actually a demonstration of exactly this WebXR technology, which enables multi-user events in any environment that you can think of, in this case, Tranquility Base on the Moon. One WebXR project that we are presently working on and that I have particular pride in presenting to you is the reincarnation of a project that was done in 2006, published in 2006 by a company called VirtuPlay, and it was called Lunar Explorer. At the time, it was a major achievement in virtual reality for the space industry because then, and until this day, it is the only published virtual reality simulation that features the entire moon. You can visit the entire moon with Lunar Explorer. So what we are doing is we are now reincarnating all of the features of Lunar Explorer in WebXR and adding many, many more new features, such as multi-user access mode. So Virtual Moon is the name of the reincarnation of the project, and right now it is under construction. As you can see in the live demo on that screen, we have already recreated in WebXR, in VR, the south pole of the moon at a URL that you can access, which is moon.espaces.com. And the simulation allows you to navigate freely using your cursor keys and your mouse or the WASD keys all over the south pole of the moon. Here at the bottom, you see that there's a slider. When you move that slider around, you change the location of the sun, so you have dynamic shadows that are being shown correctly moving over the elevation on the lunar surface. We also have buttons left and right, which enable you to navigate to other viewpoints above the lunar south pole. And with several keys, we can toggle some features in and out. For example, if we toggle on the L key, we show labels appearing over all of the salient features of the lunar south pole. If we toggle the I key, we can see an overlay of the water ice deposits on the south pole of the moon. And this, of course, can be very helpful in mission planning for moon missions. Let's navigate to one particular feature on the South Pole called Mons Malapert, or Malapert Mountain. This is, to my knowledge, either the tallest mountain on the moon or one of the tallest mountains on the moon, and it permanently has some part of it in sunshine. And the people who commissioned us with building Virtual Moon asked us to also build inside of the very top of Malapert Mountain a city of several thousand occupants, which would be kind of a resort city on the moon. And we will be making a completely virtual digital twin of this city, complete in every engineering detail for air supply, for power generation, and all of that. When I mentioned earlier that Virtual Moon will also be multi-user, what I meant is that you will be able, once we are done, to go and virtually settle or homestead or have a stay inside of the virtual Malapert city and explore the moon in virtual reality. And this illustrates one of the ways that virtual reality can offer you the next best thing to being there. The simulation will be fully photorealistic with ray tracing, done probably for people who are on low-powered hardware. The ray tracing and photorealistic high frame rate rendering will be done in the cloud, and using a 5G or better connection, you will be able to enjoy highly photorealistic, high frame rate imagery in your virtual reality headset or on your device. So that is coming up, and we are fully in production on the Virtual Moon as well as Malapert City, the virtual Malapert City. Again, Malapert City will be done in such detail that at some point we will be able to just print out the blueprints or the architectural engineering, the CAD models, so as to be able to create Malapert City on the actual moon. So in that way, the virtual Malapert City will be a kind of a training ground for the real Malapert City on the real moon. Here you see an artist preview of the main corridor of Malapert City. So you see, we will locate it inside of the very top of Malapert Mountain, which means that the main body of Malapert City will be one long tunnel or several tunnels straight through the top of Malapert Mountain. And this is the view at the steep end of the Malapert Mountain. So Malapert Mountain has a gently sloping side and another side that is much steeper. And this is the end of the corridor facing and looking out over the south pole of the moon from the picture window that we will have there to be enjoyed by the visitors and inhabitants of Malapert City. We do more than just such simulations. We also are organizing virtual reality events using this same WebXR technology. And one of the things that we are preparing is to do conferences, exhibitions, expos completely in virtual reality, which of course is a great alternative for the event industry who, with the coronavirus pandemic, is struggling to stay afloat because people don't want to travel or they are not allowed to travel anymore, and they don't want to mingle indoors with lots of other people, strangers, as well as on airplanes, etc. So for that reason, we are designing completely virtual event venues that will be the venues for events that will be organized completely in virtual reality, such as this one. Specifically for the space industry, we will be organizing a virtual reality conference event expo, which we are calling the Lunar Space Expo. The first edition of that will be in 2021, and we will announce it in due course, but here you heard it first. So that is among our plans, and that will also be yet another way of cyberspace meeting outer space. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to answering what questions you may have in the Q&A a bit later.
Thank you so much, Philippe. That was so interesting. I feel like I'm living in the future, or maybe in a Black Mirror episode, if anybody's seen that TV show. Hopefully all good things. I look forward to your Q&A session later on. I'd like to next introduce a very special speaker, Dr. Alice Gorman, aka Dr. Space Junk on Twitter. Dr. Alice Gorman is a space archaeologist, heritage consultant, and board member of the Space Industry Association of Australia, as well as Space for Women. Thank you, Alice, for coming to speak to us today. The floor is yours.
First of all, quickly, I'd like to say that I'm talking to you from Wiradjuri country and offer my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to those of any place you're joining us from as well. So what I want to talk about tonight isn't about the overview effects that we might see from the MVA camera payload, or at least not just yet. I want to talk briefly about what it is that we don't see from the moon. Next slide, please. One of the things we don't see in that classic view of Earthrise or the blue marble is all of the stars that we're surrounded by. The image makes it feel as if the Earth is just floating in a black chasm, but in actual fact, we are part of the Milky Way galaxy, and all of those stars are around us. It's just that the way you have to set up cameras to take these images doesn't actually allow you to focus on both at once. And the stars are actually relatively faint when you look at them from space anyway. So we don't see the stars when we're looking at the Earth from outside. Next slide, please. What we also don't see is the space junk that surrounds the Earth. At the moment, we know that there are over 35,000 pieces of stuff that are 10 centimeters or over, and millions that are below that size. We have the geostationary ring, which is about 35,000 kilometers above the Earth, and we have a thickish cloud that is in low Earth orbit, close to the Earth. But when we are looking at the Earth from that far away, we actually don't see any of this space junk, and we can't see it from the surface of the Earth either. Next slide, please. Of course, we're looking through space at the surface and atmosphere of the Earth, and something that we can't see is what's inside the Earth. So we know that at the heart of the Earth is a solid metal core surrounded by a thick layer of liquid, and the core is spinning inside that liquid. This creates the Earth's magnetic fields. And these magnetic fields, which we also can't see, are the structures that protect us from solar flares, solar winds, high energy radiation that would strip our atmosphere away and leave us exposed. Next slide, please. It's often said that when we look at the Earth from outside, it appears that humanity is as one, is united. But that's also because we can't see the conflict, both violent and structural, that takes place on the surface. So this is not a real image, but it's an artist's impression of what a nuclear detonation might look like if seen from space. So the good news is we don't see this. This is not a view that we have ever managed to have or capture. And you could say that that is very good news. Next slide, please. But equally, if we don't see all of that conflict that we know is raging on the surface of Earth, we also can't see peace and cooperation on the Earth. And my question about this is, what kind of Earth would look like that? How would we look at Earth and know the difference between a world riven by conflict or a world united by peace? Next slide, please. This is an animation which I don't think you can see right now, but of course, when we look at the Earth from outside, what we see is the result of millions and millions of years of continental drift. Once upon a time, all of the continents and solid land surfaces of Earth that we see were part of one large continent called Pangaea. And as the continents of the tectonic plates moved around, those islands of land drifted apart and assumed the configuration of the world as we think of it today. Next slide, please. We also can't see the future. There have been many futures of Earth that have been envisioned, and this is just one of them. This is a future Earth where the oceans are dry, where all of the resources have been extracted and used to construct cities and factories and heavens knows what, where life is not the dominant vision that we have. Technology has subsumed and overtaken life. There are many other future visions of the Earth, but that is just one of them. Next slide, please. So to finish this talk, what I'm going to talk about now is what we do see when we look at the Earth from the moon. And these words of a very famous song seem to me to capture something important. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day and the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands saying, how do you do? They're only saying, I love you. I see babies crying, I watch them grow. They'll learn so much more than I'll ever know. then I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Thank you.
Brilliant, Alice. What a way to end that short and sweet presentation of yours. I'd like to next introduce Carly Scott. Carly is the CEO of Equatorial Launch Australia, Australia's spaceport at 12 degrees. She is also on the board of the Space Industry Association of Australia, as well as CSIRO's Advanced Manufacturing Academy. Welcome, Carly. We look forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much for having me in. It's really great to be a part of this session, and following Alice is always a daunting task, particularly when she starts quoting really famous and wonderful and beautiful lyrics. So it's great to be in. I wanted to come at this from a perspective that I constantly have to reflect upon in the work that I do. So I'm developing a commercial spaceport in Northern Australia. And one of the things that is a constant, really lovely challenge for me is to try and consider different perspectives and different ways of viewing ourselves, the Earth as we know it, as we are on the Earth, and then as we see Earth in space more broadly. So when we're talking about the initiative that we are looking at right now and the option to inspire the overview effect, you know, how does the Moon Village Association work towards an initiative that really really gives that aha moment, or what is the moment that we're trying to capture? So I really wanted to look at this through the lens of when we've looked at development on Earth previously, this is the kind of discussion that we are taking into the space realm as well. So how are we starting to shift that discussion? How does this initiative play into that overall narrative? And what are the sorts of considerations and questions that we will be asking because of the inspiration of this initiative, and through the general activities that we're talking about in being able to access this vision and actuality of activating the moon, either by being there through virtual reality or otherwise, or through being out in space and capturing those images and really bringing them back down to ground. And I wanted to pin this presentation into 4 different areas. One is to look at that intent of what this initiative can provide, the effectiveness component of it, efficiency, and then some ancillary components as well. So when we look to that intent, I think there's this wonderful concept of saying, well, as an intent of this initiative to be able to provide an overview effect, there really is a concept of saying there's an opportunity for humanity to access this experience, this amazing, unique experience of an aha moment that inspires us to do better and to see things better. Sorry, Alice, if you can't see, I've got only camera up, so I'm hoping that you can see my face instead of a screen. I don't have visuals for you. And so with that sort of aha moment, there's a concept then that there is a vision, and sometimes there's a discussion that takes place with an assumption that this aha moment means that there is one vision that the whole of humanity holds, regardless of what culture you're in, that is an idealistic kind of scenario, a perfect or better scenario. And I think that's worth questioning in itself, because if you're looking at the intent of going to the moon entirely, what does that present to humanity, and what is a positive outcome there? And I think that's a worthwhile discussion to work through. Now, when you come back to the concept of how we've done this previously, I'll give the example that at Equatorial Launch, we are developing that spaceport. So we're going into largely undeveloped land in a remote area of the Northern Territory of Australia. It's Indigenous land, as we are all on. And there really is a concept of how do you balance out an idea of what's appropriate experience on that land and development of that land as well, with the people who are traditional owners of the land and all future users of the land as well. Now, if we're talking about going to the moon and experiencing actually being on the moon, there's a component of development that we should reflect on, and learnings that we should try and bring forward from what we've done on Earth and how we do that there. But there's also this kind of theoretical concept to say, well, even if you're not actually physically going to the moon, for example, but you're getting this overview effect by going out into space and looking back at Earth, whether it's from the moon or elsewhere. What is it that we're trying to inspire? What's a success look like in that inspiration? And I don't think that we have to actually have an answer to that to say, well, success is that everyone all of a sudden feels that they should be donating more to charities or whatever it is. But I think if we don't have any concepts to pin down for people, it's hard to sort of aggregate everyone around a feeling of community and that we're sharing something positive in that. And that's important, because if you're not sharing some communal element that you feel is successful through that experience, it's very hard to then carry that through and feel that you've got motivation to carry a learning through into your day-to-day life more broadly. And this carries me through this kind of intent concept a little more. So we've started to look at intent from, what is the aha moment? Is there a perfect aha moment? Should there be one? But more than that, if we flex that out and say, well, perhaps there is just this really flexible opportunity for a range of different people to have their own aha moment and their own inspiration about their own lives, their role in their day-to-day world, with the people around them and their experience on Earth. That's a really significant opportunity to provide to anyone. But I think it's worthwhile thinking through that to say, well, that doesn't have to look like one particular outcome, but how do we give people an opportunity to experience and express and connect to something as part of that? And that really links to the next part. It's a day-to-day thing. I was speaking to a few people in the retail precinct where I'm working from, and I sort of said to them, well, what's the most amazing thing that's happened to you in your life that's really changed your world? And people had their various stories, and a lot of people actually said COVID. And the one thing that people keep coming back to is, well, even through COVID, where you're like, geez, I miss my family, I miss my friends. As soon as you get the opportunity to live back in your new normal again, life takes over, feeding the kids, whatever you need to do. And you kind of lose that inspiration, or I guess the power of that inspiration in how you change your day-to-day life. So if we're looking at how to make the most of providing people with an aha moment, there's also an opportunity to say, what's the follow-on actions that we provide people so that they can integrate this amazing experience into some follow-on where they do then have an opportunity to better their lives, or they continue that experience somehow and hold on to that so it doesn't just fade away really quickly. So I think that intent component is really fun to explore. Some of the learnings of colonial kind of experiences and how we might modify those in our exploration and however we explore are things that we can bring into this discussion now. The effectiveness is another commentary that I think is really worthwhile talking through. People will say, well, if you don't have a solid measure of what is the aha moment, have 10 people achieved it and have they held on to it for 5 years and then changed the world? That's a success. Well, if you don't have a solid measure of effectiveness, it can be hard to communicate the benefit of what you're doing. And once again, I don't think that there should be just one hard and fast opportunity of what an effective approach to this is. And I raise this because quite often with any activity that to do with space, people will ask, well, how much are you spending on that? Is it the most effective use of that money? Could that money go to something more useful? So there's an effectiveness question that's always thrown in there and is inevitably something that we need to talk about through our experiences in these projects that we're looking at. And I think when you're talking about that, it is that stripping back once again to say, well, effectiveness will necessarily assume that there is some perfect vision of what should be achieved, and that one thing is all that will be achieved by this initiative, which is, I think, just wrong. So the opportunity now to talk with everyone here about, well, what is that? How do we flesh that out a bit is really useful. And it comes into that efficiency again, that good use of money. And you always hear it in space. Well, if you're spending X billions of dollars in exploring space, why wouldn't you spend that elsewhere where there are very, very useful causes here on Earth, for example? And once again, there's an opportunity for all of the Moon Village Association activities to look at that lens as well and say, well, yes, you can use this money elsewhere on other initiatives, but we believe that the work that we are doing does provide that gateway into a discussion that's useful about humanity or about whatever it might be. So that efficiency and use of money, you've got two lenses. One is to say, well, we're going to demonstrate by doing a project, we're going to show that anyone can really do something meaningful and exciting in space. It's now accessible to a broader array of people. And that's an important message in its own right. But then I think there is this other component around saying, well, what are the range of different flow-on benefits that are being generated by the activities that we're looking at? And that comes down to that final point before I close out, which is around ancillary benefits. And I think one of the most beautiful things about working in the space sector is that you'll find some direct benefits that you pin down that you really target and you want to achieve through any activity you're doing. And then there are these opportunities for some sensational things to spring forward that you never thought of. So how do you capture those in any of the initiatives that you're doing and discussions that you're having? You know, you kind of usually get these fantastic, you know, if we're talking about an overview effect and what that can inspire in people, you're talking about the ability to inspire change that is usually on Earth demonstrated by or sourced out of a complete disaster or a complete epiphany of something amazing. And you're kind of treading an in-between space here where you're providing people with an opportunity to have a synthetic experience of an overview effect, but hopefully inspiring the same changes in their own life. And so, you know, is that possible, and to what degree, and you know, how successful is that? What I'd come back to is that there's no one project that has to solve every single thing or provide, you know, because this project was undertaken, it gave people an epiphany, and one of those people created the new equation that Einstein couldn't figure out. You don't have to have that. You're building a positive conversation. And I think that's worthwhile capturing. And this is one of the opportunities to capture it here. So finishing that up, I think this is a really wonderful platform and opportunity to discuss what can be put into an old framework of development and social development, as well as physical development and experience of the world, experience of yourself and your place in the world. The fact that we're being able to do that just through this engagement already is really, really worthwhile, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring that lens to it. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Carly. That is really fascinating. Thank you for sharing your insights. There's a comment in the chat from Marco who says that there's a smaller aha moment for those who chase solar eclipses. It establishes a sense of scale that is humbling, but it takes a bunch of hippies to appreciate it with a certain mindset and a lot of fuel in their car. Definitely not an experience with universal appeal or access. Really good point that I think a lot of people experience the overview effects differently, whether it might be through VR or through something a little bit more out there, like chasing solar eclipses or chasing high altitude balloons and things, which I've had an experience with. So it's nice to see that the overview effect brings people together, but through their own lenses. And I think that's something really wonderful about this MVA Payload project. So finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Jane Pell, and I wish I could read out her entire biography because it's amazing. But in summary, Sarah is an analog astronaut, award-winning artist, and researcher. Sarah Jane, I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Please unmute your mic. Sarah, we can't hear you. Could you please unmute your mic?
You should be able to hear me now. Is that correct?
Yes, perfect.
Terrific.
Is that your painting behind you?
It is, it is. Thank you, V, and thank you, Carly. I too would like to acknowledge I'm here in Australia in what you know as Melbourne and what I know as Wurundjeri country, lands of the traditional owners and part of the Kulin Nation here in Australia. This brings me to my first point, these of ancient cultures and technologies, looking at the Neolithic stone monuments that have been culturally significant throughout human history. These are effectively space projects that have lasted millennia. We're not thinking about short-term payloads here and the cost ratio benefits. These are portals, offerings and signals to the gods, and tools for mapping our place amongst the stars. For when we ask, will humans bring such culture to the moon? It is almost a given. So let's take a second now to visualize what it might mean to have a moon henge. The astronomical alignment will differ. The cornerstone, of course, will point to Earth, and the horizon vantage will seem strange and even small. And yet we will again prepare such sacred astronomical sites. It is a monument or a cultural heritage call to action that humans share. Astronauts might consider it a place for prayer and reflection, the vantage point for a bit of peace and quiet between a working day to look up and back at planet Earth. It might be the point where you all come together for communion and communication, and of course, there'll be opportunities for ritual dance as an extension of who we are. Now, my name is Sarah Jane Pell, and I like to call myself an artist astronaut, and that is by every measure difficult to quantify and validate. I'm also an associate professor at Monash University and a commercial diver. I work at the intersection of human-centered computing and creativity, immersive visualization, and extreme performance. I'm also appointed as co-chair of the International Astronautical Federation Technical Committee for the Cultural Utilization of Space, or ITICUS, and I'm a member of the Moon Village Association. My first payload was launched with the Japanese Space Agency under their cultural program back in 2009. On board the SpriteSat, a microsatellite developed by the I apologize for my pronunciation, Tohoku University, conducted scientific observations of atmospheric luminous emissions, which are called sprites. It was launched as a piggyback payload on the HIIA rocket from JAXA's, as part of JAXA's broader greenhouse gas observatory satellite system called GONASS. And it orbited in geosynchronous sun orbit, carrying a payload of micro-etching artworks that triggered an online exhibition when these sprites hit the antenna. And these digital figures came to life on the screen. They formed part of a cultural program connecting the wonders of discovery and technology to our poetry, to our philosophy, to our questions and perspectives, dancing around like the sprites themselves. They also served a deeper need to connect our exploration programs to the desire to reach out, to venture out, to explore beyond ourselves without losing sight of who we are and where we have come from. In the project called Optics of 2009 to 2014, artist Daniela Depoulis uses a form of Cold War espionage technology, which sounds rather appealing, and it applies radio astronomy instruments for kind of a clandestine global communication known as moon bouncing. Now, during this live performance, radio signals are used to send images to the moon from radio antennas in one of 3 locations. These signals bounce off the moon and return to Earth like television static, and they are picked up again through the Duolingo radio telescope. These radio waves of an image are still traveling through space, through the cosmos at the speed of light. These moon-balanced images are also presented back to the people who created them as postcards, the transmission and the postcard. This is one of my favorites. This famous blue marble photo from the Lunar Orbiter imaging reconnaissance missions, transmitted back to us as a kind of distorted reflection or a fuzzy self-portrait of Earth. It's a kind of wry commentary on self-actualization, of surveillance, and let's say, the selfie era. And I too confess that I sent a self-portrait. I mean, who else can say that they've not only performed on the moon, but they've had their photo taken on the moon and with the Apollo 14 crew? This brings me to my own quest of understanding what it means for humanity to be performing astronautics. And at this point, I might also say there's somebody else with their microphone on if they want to switch to mute as well. So in performing astronautics and becoming extraterrestrial, I'm interested to learn through experience that sweet spot that we hear about, that astronauts talk of, through the orbital perspective, which links us so clearly to what I understand and know as the raptures of the deep in commercial diving. Because it is in this that, as an experience, as a perspective, that helps us infinitely feel connected to the planetary and natural planetary rhythms that make us whole. So I've spent decades researching and exploring the depths of the oceans to the highest peaks on planet Earth, undertaking kind of a practice-based approach to research into human factors and communications through experimentation and exploration, and testing all kinds of vehicles for obtaining new perspectives. That is not my dog. That dog lives in virtual space somewhere. We all need lunar pets. As a citizen scientist astronaut candidate for Project Possum, for example, we undertake a range of scientific, of research, outreach, and physical training activities. We are testing cameras, robotic systems, portable tools, equipment such as vehicle seats that are accompanying the actual instruments and the suits that are fitted within what we hope will be commercially operated and accessible vehicles. We're also looking at the human environment interactions specific to these tasks and the potentials beyond towards a new understanding of both space and spatiality. Now, for me, the underwater environment provides a great analog to these other technical environments. It is a way of translating the operational confidence and competence to develop a new skill set and an acute extrasensory awareness for this new body, and the new bodily potentials that come with an altered gravity condition. As a communicator of other types, I also sometimes add complexity to already complex situations, like this flight where I also delivered a TEDx talk from the air, or bringing my skills to other environments where we learn to egress and enter the water and enter back to the planet safely. One of my favorite projects that brought it all together was working as a simulation astronaut for Project Moonwalk. I was proud to partner with the team as a simulation astronaut to investigate the technologies and the human robotic collaboration specifically for surface EVA exploration activities, particularly for training European analog environments and astronauts, but also setting up technology pathways. This particular mission occurred in Marseille in 2016, and the project ran with the support of the European Commission for over 3 years. So we began in the pool and we increasingly gradually added complexity and higher fidelity scenarios, testing the technologies and systems applying the embodied understanding of this altered gravity environment and using a user-centered designed feedback system for the team who had already demonstrated and tested this technology out in the desert in Spain. We also took the work into the pool and conducted EVAs overnight, looking at a simulated far side of the moon activities and demonstrating the capabilities in low light environments. Gradually adding to this complexity in preparation for a series of EVAs or simulated spacewalks out in the open ocean environment where Cousteau had started subsea habitat projects with Koumi almost 50 years prior. So in any of these state of removals from the normal or natural world, we question how we behave. We want to understand our ultimate utility, our purpose, and our systems of support and interaction with the environment. So when I refer to living systems or our taxonomies of life, I include both our biology and our ecology. For me, it's really important to understand the place in which the perspective comes. So no matter how far we venture or how dazzling our technology is, we still rely on ordinary storytelling for extraordinary experiences. So I've worked with the Agency of Human Robotic Lunatics with all kinds of technologies to expand upon this, looking at interactive camera systems called the Cinema Swarm, which is linked to a live HCT Vive motion capture system, so that I can puppeteer an avatar of myself in the Gandolfi 2 EVA spacesuit underwater during the project Moonwalk, as if I was in Comex live before an audience. And to share in the complex layers of this simulated operation, both real and imagined, a kind of scenario in the ocean and on the moon at the same time. This was effectively a simulation of a simulation. I was using gesture controlled in front of an audience to explain the gesture control I was using to control the robots underwater. It also enabled me to give a keynote performance with some visceral sense of the experience for those who couldn't or didn't dive in with me. So embracing these immersive visualization possibilities, such as the Insta360 Pro in the field, opened up a whole lot of potentials. In this case, at the Mars Desert Research Station, an analog at altitude in the Utah Desert in the US. Now, while we performed the mandatory Mars Olympiad and all kinds of activities, this technology and its utilization helped to understand how critical cameras may be to send signs of life back to remote ground crews, for example, but also to loved ones, for them to have some understanding of the experience in which cannot be shared, or how their modifiers, in fact, their behavior is in fact modifying. The astronauts started sending signatures of human presence in extraterrestrial space rather than signs of life. They were choreographing themselves. They were looking at how important and essential it was for preparing new teams. And it somehow started to speak volumes of the human condition, ritualizing again, building monolithic rock sculptures. It seemed like the most natural thing to be doing, and to engage in both play and performance, which in itself was a human factors supporting principle at such a distance from home. We also personalized it. We had a name for the camera, which we called Magpie, because it always had eyes on us. So what does it mean to be watching? And what does it mean to be able to step into an image, to feel transported to another time and place, even if it's a wonderland beyond imagining? To have a lens at a distance or a perspective that is impossible to reach in your own lifetime, suddenly there for you to experience. During the Spectra 2018 mission in Poland, we used thermal imaging cameras and LiDAR cameras, similarly, as they were useful in the PLR Moon-Mars simulation station in Poland, where they have a fully enclosed darkened crater simulating the far side of the moon. Here you can see, of course, the Moonhenge captured now famously. We were also able to use the LiDAR projects as a transmission tool direct to the Monash Immersive Visualization Platform, Future Control Room, and to the Cave 2 environment, where a choreographer was able to move through the simulated space for a loss of life crew scenario. He could explore Moonhenge and after a fuse replacement incident and send the instructions back via VR for me to follow his head and hand gestures and ultimately recreate his dance of mourning for the loss of the commander out in the landscape. It also demonstrated these Moon Earth Moon VR data point transmissions and their usefulness for site-embodied effective performance training. So I used this LiDAR data crater as a virtual performance space that I took to Ars Electronica to perform a lunar parliament, using the Rococo motion capture suit to command the Apollo astronaut again from the moon back from the LiDAR data to present an historic address, the first time of a simulated lunar parliamentary address, showing that it's moments of extreme separation, facing the exposure and the vulnerability in the midst of the open and the eternal, unfathomable darkness, that it is natural to both look inward and outward for the most precious connection to life itself. It reminds us that in order to speak of gravity, we must also speak of levity and where we find it. So the final project that I would just introduce you to is Stellar Corpus. It included 7 sparkling avatars made entirely of light. Governed by my own movements, which appear both human and divine, they have been pre-recorded using the Rococo motion capture suit in a UFO playground, I might add, direct into the Cave 2 environment. It's a cosmos, it's a playground, it's unusual. There's a dance of the celestial muses, which evokes deep awe and reverence, a strong feeling of respect or amazement brought on by something that is beautiful and sacred. And in a sense, these celestial avatars, because they are surrounded in this action, this live motion streaming, are interacting with the audience, and they are represented as human forms in what is effectively another type of Moonhenge. They are starkly contrasted to the dark, star-filled cosmos. And they disrupt traditional interpretations of human spaceflight training and even live mixed VR reality performance through this unique use of the Cave 2 technology as a live performance system for the first time in the world. But it's only unique and it's only special because at the end of the day, it is generated by a living force. It is a trace rather than a computer-generated image. It is, even though at this distance, there is a difference and we know it. We know the experience of it. So when we have the first camera set on the moon that is going to look back at the planet permanently and send a transmission through, we know that this will be generated live from this living, sparkling system, an icon glistening as the living Gaia that we hold dear.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. That was beautiful. Such a lovely speech and wonderful visuals to accompany, for sure.
Thank you.
I would like to now invite all the panelists to come onto Zoom now. We're no longer using Frame, and we'll just conduct the rest of the webinar, including Q&A on Zoom to avoid any technical difficulties. So thank you everyone for joining us on the moon. That was great, but now we're gonna light speed back to Earth. So are there any questions from our listeners? I think here's a question that I had for Sarah. do you have any criticisms of astronaut analogues? Because there's so many different ones, and they're popping up all over the world. So what sort of things would you say would be a critique of these analogues, and how could we make them better for the future?
Gosh, that's a really broad question. I think half of the planet now understands what a space analog is, and they didn't a year ago. The COVID-19 situation has absolutely heightened our sense of what it might mean to try and live in self-confinement and containment and separation, and to create an effective airlock between themselves, to protect themselves, to dress and so on. So I think space analogues in general, there is, as you say, a resurgence to activate many sites around the world. But it is not that so dissimilar to what happened when there was great enthusiasm, say 50 years ago in the Apollo era. At that particular time, there were nearly 200 underwater sites being used. Now we have one that is a full-time or active underwater laboratory. So that gives you some sense of, while it might feel like we're utilizing a lot of analog sites at the moment, that there are still a lot that we could be doing. But as Carly has suggested too, there are some very real reasons why we look at the management of our ecology and our training systems, and where they might be placed, where we conduct our research, what is a requirement. The popularization of more recreational based experiences is great as well for developing the will and inspiring and encouraging people to participate in these fields.
Yeah, for sure. It's just amazing what sort of effects COVID has had on everyone, and sometimes for the better. I've seen many times astronauts and previous astronauts actually send video messages or post them on Facebook and Twitter and things to say, you know what, it's okay to be isolated because we did that too, and this is how you can do it in a healthy and safe way. And perhaps analogues is the next step to that. Perhaps we'll see more people going through these analogues and learning more. Buddy or Brad asked a question: would you mind defining what an astronaut analogue is? While I've been doing space radiation research for NASA for the past 23 years, I do not get out much and learn about things like this. Well, Buddy, space radiation is the one thing we can't simulate on Earth, because that would be a little bit disastrous. Sarah or anybody else, would you like to address Buddy's question? What is an astronaut analogue?
Sure, I use it the other way around a little bit. Analog astronaut is more akin. So we have a simulation astronaut, we have an analog astronaut. So an analog environment is the space. So we use that term in relation to a space that might have some physical features that mimic something that we find in space. It offers the geological conditions, for example, the environmental conditions, the types of exposure to hazards that we would expect to see in a space environment. There are other types. There are also simulated analog environments. So we have bed tilt analogs, for example, where astronauts are tilted upside down to simulate or to actually encourage a vestibular tilt, a blood flow tilt that is similar to a long duration space mission, where they have a microgravity environment for an extended period of time, and they can conduct a small study. When I say that I'm a simulation astronaut underwater, I do so very specifically because of certain jurisdictions. When I'm in the water coming in, I'm considered a safety diver. As soon as I put the suit on underwater, I'm considered a research subject in some countries, and I'm considered a payload in other countries. Depends on the legal framework and the jurisdiction in which I'm working. But while I'm undertaking mission simulation activities, I'm a simulation astronaut. When outside of those trials, when I'm undertaking what I would call an analog mission, I'm acting as an analog astronaut in a site. It may be Moon, Mars analog. They're the most common that we reflect on. It could be inside, it could be outside. This question relates about the neutral buoyancy labs. even small ones. Is there much need? Yes, there's a great need for them. The current pool systems that we have are not really big enough. We need dedicated facilities for undertaking occupational work without the recreational crossover. There's only a couple active worldwide because it's costly, complex, hazardous, very beneficial.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I can be assured that if anyone has any analog questions, you're the person to ask. I'd like to go to Alice now quickly. There is a question in the chat about a moon museum from Andrew. How great would the first space museum be on the moon, Alice? Can you maybe predict what a space museum on the moon would have in it?
Well, the first thing I will say to Andrew is it would be great. It would be fantastic. So if I, let's say theoretically, were given the job to set up a museum on the moon, my first thing would be, it would be like a sort of a purpose-built structure. It might not be a building in the way that we think of it. It would be something purpose-built. We wouldn't just plonk it in any old place. And we'd have to think about what is the story of the moon that we would want to tell. So I would be very interested in making sure that every nation on Earth, for example, were represented somehow in that museum. It wouldn't be able to tell the same old story of the Cold War space race and rivalries between wealthy nations and political powers. So I would be looking for something that would include a much broader community of people and that would tell different stories about the moon. But it would be the best fun to think about what those stories are, because one of the things about a museum is you're not just curating the past, you're creating a resource for the future. And of course, as an archaeologist who loves material stuff, I have a passion for objects and the physical interaction with them, but we'd also have to think about virtual ways of interacting with these objects and think about how people in the future would, I mean, we can only predict so much, but we can try. What kind of legacy do we want to create for people to look back on 100 years from now? What would future space societies need from the past to help sustain them? So there are so many challenges, but if anybody wants to finance the Moon Museum, I'm open to opportunities.
Sarah Jane has just pasted a cool URL in the chat, moongallery.eu. There is already a moon gallery, as it were, but a moon museum would be even cooler because you could, go to the place and touch it, and humans need that tactile experience, don't we?
Touching is so important, but Sarah Jane's referring to a very interesting artifact, which I think this is what she means. So its presence on the moon is disputed, but it is a tiny little plaque that has 4 artworks from very well-known artists, including some that are maybe slightly on the dodgy side. So there are some really interesting ideas around this. But so yes, I'm sure Sarah Jane will put a link in the chat if people are. Oh yes, the fallen astronaut as well. She's quite right. So people have already sent things to the moon that are meant to kind of memorialize or evoke a community or a feeling or a past. And I think the thing that does is, as we've seen in numerous of our talks tonight, is emphasize that the moon is not, or the moon and the Earth are not just about technology. It's also about social life and feelings and attachments and community. And there are objects that are golf balls, yes. So the actual golf balls on the moon, I think it was Alan Bean, or was it played golf on the moon. So these objects with all of this, you wouldn't have to take them away from their location and put them in Art Moon Museum. Like we could curate a virtual moon museum right now, hello Philippe, and make that something people could interact with. So if anybody wishes to discuss this more, we can do that offline, but definitely something worth thinking about.
Fantastic.
So,
and sorry.
If I can react to that, so you may remember in my presentation that I mentioned Malapert City, so which would be a virtual city first on the virtual moon, And our plans for Malapert City already include a museum, Alice. So we will be looking forward to working with you for the design of the exhibits in the virtual museum on virtual Malapert City on the virtual moon, which of course will be a kind of a dress rehearsal for the real Malapert City on the real moon with a real virtual museum, with a real museum on the real moon. So yeah.
I love it. Yes, my ears were definitely perked when you were talking about those things, Philippe. And I think Carly would agree that this also offers us a huge opportunity for Indigenous engagement with aspects of lunar heritage. So there is just so much potential in taking this route to enhancing and connecting people to the moon. But of course, we are thinking about connections to the Earth tonight as well, through the MVA Payload. I think these discussions have been so interesting just in looking at the different perspectives that we can take from these technologies and the ways that we can use them, as I believe the MVA would desire and argue, to actually enhance our sense of belonging to the Earth-Moon system and to the universe at large.
Brilliant, absolutely. Alice, I'm respectful of your time. Please let us know when you need to head off to your next thing. We'll continue the discussion still here.
If it's okay with everybody, I might have to leave due to some other commitments, but it has been such fun to be part of this panel tonight. Thank you to the MVA and to the other panelists. It's been inspiring to hear everything. I'm sure that you will continue to enjoy the discussion. So good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, Alice.
It is never okay for you to leave, Alice.
Alrighty, let's see what other questions we have. I think we have one for Philip. Is it Philippe or Philip? Because I said Philippe before and I really want to make sure it's correct.
I prefer Philip.
Philip, Carly asked, have you seen a significant increase in VR production related to space activities through COVID period?
We've seen an increase in VR production and in VR projects because of the coronavirus, but not specifically, not just for the space-related VR. We've seen increase in VR activity across the board, especially for meetings, so for remote workers, as well as in the event industry, for doing virtual reality events, as well as for remote training and remote education also. So all of the social situations where not offering the next best thing to being there without being there physically and running the risk of getting infected. So we ourselves as a company did see a market increase in the share of our work that is going towards space. And that actually started like a year before the coronavirus pandemic. But through the pandemic, we have just seen it go up and up. And so in that sense, yes. One thing I may also add is that through all these virtual meetings and meeting people inside of virtual environments and preparing for the thing that I mentioned, like the Lunar Virtual Expo for next year, we come across people such as Sarah. And so what has noticeably happened during the COVID crisis and pandemic is the coming together of people and bouncing ideas off of each other that enrich the new space industry with this influx of ideas from the computer graphics simulation industry. One of them that I would like to mention here is, and I've spoken about this with Sarah before, so connected to the virtual moon, the virtual moon will be multi-purpose. It will serve the actual space industry for mission planning, for outreach, etc. But it will also be a space for space enthusiasts where you can go and relive all of the historic events of spaceflight, both on Earth. You can witness as if you were there, the first launch of Sputnik, of Gagarin. You can go to Salyut, you can go to the International Space Station, all of that in photorealism and via the univirtual access that I mentioned. But one particular thing that we would like to do is to give people on Earth the next best thing to feeling like an astronaut doing an EVA, an extravehicular activity. And so we will probably do an extension or an add-on to the Virtual Moon project where perhaps via Kickstarter, where we offer people to buy a collection of equipment, which will include a submersible VR headset, a device enabling you to breathe underwater, maybe a little motor compressing air and giving that to you. Also a neutral buoyancy device and some means of tracking your entire body movements underwater. And then the idea will be that you can go and do an EVA, virtual reality simulated EVA in your own pool in your backyard. And so that would be connected to Virtual Moon and its recreation of historical EVAs. And so I look forward to that one in particular. It really is as close as you can come to going to space yourself and doing an EVA, but from the comfort of the swimming pool in your backyard.
For sure, what cool technology. And I really like how it's becoming more accessible to more people around the world, whether more accessible to people of different demographics and backgrounds too, so that everybody feels like they have access to this sort of education and experience. Awesome work, Philip. Next, a question for Carly. Carly, what unique features can Australia offer to the global space industry?
Such a broad question. I have a slight bias in the launch perspective that I'll start on first. So I will take a second to focus on that. And what you're seeing in Australia is overall a really exciting conversation where it's a culmination of a lot of effort by industry researchers and the space community more broadly to look at the role Australia's played historically in space, and we have had a long history in the space industry. And now seeing that our regulatory frameworks are coming together with a real focus from our politicians through to our regulators in facilitating industry development, research, and engagement in the space sector more broadly. It's a really exciting time in Australia to be engaging in the space sector and for the space sector outside of Australia to be reaching in and seeing what Australia has to offer. And what that is a range of elements of the space ecosystem. So for us in launch, we know that our site at about 12 degrees south is a really strong opportunity for launch with 2 lunar insertions direct a day, and the efficiency of being close to the equator alongside of a really low risk profile site that can achieve a lot of trajectories from the site with a low risk profile. So there's right from that ground component of launch recovery in Australia and real opportunities there because we have such a vast land mass that has low population bases, low infrastructure risks, low international boundary risks as well. But at the same time, such strong trading relations that allow you to transfer technology and information and share that quite strongly, but also really strong commercial and research sector to back your work when you come to Australia to do it. So launch is one component that Australia can play a really, really strong role within. When you go forward from that, I mentioned that we've got those strong trade relations and research sectors as well. And our technology development and research is exceptionally strong here. But alongside of that, there's a real willingness and a range of initiatives that are structured to work with international partners towards collaborative endeavours. And one of the things that we talk about in Australia is that we are so acutely aware that geographically, not in space terms, but in Earth terms, we're a long distance away from other countries. And so we're used to that concept of collaborating on initiatives that are really huge tasks to achieve. And I think everything pretty much in the space sector is a really large task to achieve. It's multi-generational, and certainly drawing in more assets than just what's at hand immediately is going to be beneficial to your outcome. So I think when you look to see what Australia can offer to the space sector, you're looking at a nation that is poised for engagement, both from the infrastructure component, the setting as far as our international relations, trade relations and governance settings here and finance settings, but also a sector that has tremendous skill and knowledge and ability to enhance collaborative efforts internationally. So I think it is the most exciting time to engage with Australia, regardless of what element of space you're involved in. Hugely biased answer.
Carly, that is, it couldn't be more true nowadays for the Moon Village Association, because as we start to pick up momentum in the industry, more and more people are going to be really interested in that overview effect and what space means for them. And the Moon Village Association is going to really bring that home to people. So I think no matter where we sit in the space industry and where we identify ourselves, there's something for us, and there's something that we can communicate to others in the next generation. So it's wonderful work that you're doing. And linking to the MVA, I have a question for Liza, or Liza. How are people able to get involved in MVA? And do you need to be qualified to help MVA?
Right, so the MVA is an organization where everybody can register. Even the price to register, the volunteer fee, let's say, it's very low. For students, I think it's like 25 euros per year. So to get involved in the first step, it's that easy. You just apply and you're in. To get actively involved in the project, you have to do a little bit of an investigation, what your interests are and where they fit in within what's happening in the MVA. So we have, for example, a group that is looking at architecture on the moon. That's so if you're a space architect, go to that, right? There's another one talking about cooperation. Cooperation activities, standardization of hardware and stuff like that. So there's a lot of specific interest topics that are already in place, and people can go and find the group and just say, hi, I would like to get involved, and that's basically it. There are projects besides the work groups like ours, which are a little bit more, we are a little bit more intentional in what we're doing. So for the next recruitment phase, let's say, we may have some very specific requirements. So we might need an engineer with a specific background to bring in the knowledge, the technical knowledge that is needed. But we might also just need a couple of extra hands to take on some tasks that are like general work. So a student that is not an engineer, is not an artist, does not have a specialization yet, could potentially also find something useful to do within the project, and hopefully something that interests them as well. So in short, there's stuff to do for pretty much everyone. And if there isn't something that fits you specifically, well, that's kind of the point of the MVA. Go to the MVA and just create the new group. And everybody that was also looking for the same thing will come to you. So it's about self-organizing.
Fantastic, Liza. And again, I go back to that point about access for everyone, no matter what background you are or if you have a qualification or not. Everyone is welcome at the MVA and everyone has a place. So we hope that we can see more people coming to contribute and perhaps seeing this first payload project take off. I think that's all the questions that I have for today. I'd now like to hand over to Maddy for closing remarks, but I'd also like to thank Maddy and her team for putting this together, because it's just been wonderful, especially with the virtual reality efforts that we've been doing. We've done lots of preparation for this, and I've just had a great time moderating, which has made my job very easy. So let's all thank Maddy before I hand over to her.
Thank you, Maddy.
Thank you, V. Very, very much appreciate that. It was an absolute pleasure. I was just coming on to, in fact, thank all of you for your time and your efforts. Really appreciate it. I know I can speak on behalf of Lisa, the Payload project, and also the MVA. that we very much appreciate everyone's time and efforts for coming and speaking today and sharing your perspectives. So if you'd like to continue the conversation online, you can follow MVA Payload on Twitter or Moon Village Payload on Facebook, and please continue the discussion. Any sort of questions that you have, whether you're an attendee or a panelist, we'd love to continue that conversation. So thank you very much. Ad Astra.